morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to the November 13th Special Finance and Audit Committee meeting. And I'd firstly like to recognize we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Nanaimo First Nation. Our clerk today will be Ms. Shilaguri. The question period sign-up sheet is on the desk by the computers. And if during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question related to an agenda item, if they could please write their name and the agenda item on the sheet, and then I'll call you up at the appropriate time during the question period. First item on the agenda is the introduction of late items. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Chair. So the only late item today is just a replacement of the wording of the recommendation for the report 6C. Thank you, Worship.
Very good. Motion for approval of the agenda is amended. So moved, Councillor Thorpe, second Councillor Hemmons. All those in favour? Opposed? Motion carries. Motion for the adoption of the minutes is circulated. Moved, Councillor Bonner, seconded Councillor Hemmons. All those in favour? Motion carries. The next item, we're delighted to have a presentation from Brent Roots, President and CEO, Partnership Group, Sponsorship Specialist, Sponsorship. And Mr. Rudolph, you're going to introduce this.
Thank you, members of council. Brent's been here at staff's suggestion, recommendation, and he's very busy. He's actually leaving here to catch a plane. He's a nationally recognized expert in the field of sponsorship. He's also a local resident and involved in the Rotary and a variety of other things. We often talk about expenditures with our municipal budgets, and we often don't talk about revenues. Sometimes we do. But it is important that we think of our revenue opportunities, and so it was good that we have the opportunity to hear this. Brent gave a presentation to our senior management team 2 weeks ago. It's not the first time that he's been in front of our council in this municipality. He's been here before. He has done work with our Parks, Rec, and Culture in our city before, so I'll let him introduce himself and explain what he's doing. And it's just really here for your information and to whet your appetite perhaps in terms of the subject matter and what maybe some other municipalities are doing in the area of naming rights and that type of thing. So I'll turn it over to Brent. I think we budgeted possibly up to a total of an hour for this if there are that many questions. If not, I think your slide deck will get you through quicker than that.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Through the chair and members of the committee, thanks for the opportunity to be here and do the presentation. As you had mentioned, I'm going to try to get through the deck as quickly as possible. There's a lot of statistics, a lot of information, but at least you'll be able to see it. And then we can open the floor for questions at that point. So my background, I have been in, just really quickly, I've been in the business about 30 years, started in Atlantic Canada and then moved west, ended up in working for not-for-profits and charities, helping them fundraise through corporate sponsorship, as well as working for pro sports, NHL teams, those sorts of things on the corporate sponsorship side. That's the background. I work for a company called Partnership Group Sponsorship Specialists, and that is, the company's about 18 years old. And so I've been working with this, with the company since its inception in 2001. So that's the background on myself. I could go on and make stories up and all that sort of stuff and tell you all that sort of thing, but I'm just going to kind of move along. My goal here is to take a look at sponsorship industry, some of the trendings that happen, some of the different opportunities, some national research that's come out specifically around the industry as a whole, but also from a municipality's perspective. I'm going to delve into a couple of quick case studies and talk about why sponsorship should be important to the city of Nanaimo. From the perspective of just looking at it as a revenue channel, additional revenue channel, and how it all affects ultimately your bottom line, and then what are the next steps if interested. So that's all going to be bundled into this quick presentation. So as you can see, these are just clients that we're working with either right now or have worked with in the last couple of years. And there's, when municipalities get into the sponsorship business, it's not just the big centers like Toronto or Edmonton or Vancouver for that matter. It is everything right down the scale to cities the size of Nanaimo, cities the size of Kelowna, cities the size of Summerside PEI at 14,000 or Morinville, Alberta at 9,000 people. So it's about finding that alternate revenue channel and utilizing that revenue coming from corporate sponsors. So that's kind of a background. This is a short list of some of the municipalities, as I said, we're either working with presently or have recently worked with. I want to be really clear, we're not the only people in Canada that do this business. We do have competitors. I am going to reference a couple of them in here. Ultimately, if you go down this road, you will go out to an RFP and go through that process. So I want you to know that my intent today is to educate or create awareness rather than it isn't designed to pitch you our services or anything. Everything that I'm going to show you, all our competitors do, okay? So first of all, I thought I better define what sponsorship is, and I want to define it sort of in a different backwards approach, and that's the fact that it's completely different. Corporate sponsorship marketing is completely different from philanthropy. Philanthropy, according to the Canada Revenue Agency, is when a company or a person gives altruistically. They give with no expectation of anything in return. So if a company comes along and says to the city, hey, I love the program that you're doing at the Nanaimo Aquatic Center. I think it's an amazing programs that you're running there. We'd like to give you $1 million and you can put our name on the building. It's not philanthropy. The government clearly states that if their name goes on the building, it is not a gift. It is not a donation. It is a corporate sponsorship or a marketing investment. And that goes the same if you go to sponsor the Cibc Run for the Cure or anything else. Those are not philanthropic gifts. Those are sponsorships. So philanthropy is when that company or an individual gives to the city or gives to a not-for-profit or to a charity with no expectation of anything in return other than a charitable tax receipt. So it's important to understand that side. That's philanthropy, and that's not what we're talking about when we talk corporate sponsorship. Second thing is everybody thinks about funding and underwriting. Let's go to RBC. Let's get some funding through their new youth initiative, and we can run some programs there. Or we can go to Jumpstart and Canadian Tire, and they'll help us build another playground or park. Those are grants. You apply for them. You have to jump through a lot of hoops. And you also have, it's great money, but you have to jump through a lot of hoops, but you also can only spend the money specifically on those things that you indicated in your grant you were going to use the money for. So if you don't use all the money, you have to give it back. So those are grants and underwriting of programs or projects and those sorts of things. It is, and companies do it. Foundations give money through grants and funding and underwriting. But the other side of that is that it's great money, but you can only use it for specific things. So the last one that I wanted to talk about is corporate sponsorship. And that is when a company gives you, the city, or a not-for-profit or a charity or a pro sports team or whatever, they give you money, and in return, they get exposure. They get their brand out there. They get to touch, feel, and hold the audience that they're trying to reach. Any of those types of things. It is a marketing expenditure. So I presume everybody's heard of the Cibc Run for the Cure? So the Cibc Run for the Cure, Cibc pays over $1 million a year in cash for the naming rights to that national event. They also spend another $500,000 in value in kind. It does not come from CIBC's philanthropy budget. It does not come from their community investment budget. It specifically comes from their marketing budget and actually their HR budget, because part of the objectives are to build employee engagement. And that's achieved through that. In fact, right now, CIBC has this past year had a 100% employee engagement through CIBC Run for the Cure. Every employee coast to coast actually was involved with the Run for the Cure. They either donated, they volunteered, or they participated. And that's a pretty good engagement level if you're a corporation. And engaged employees, guess what? They're higher productivity. Higher productivity means higher share price, makes shareholders happy. So this is one of our competitors out of Chicago, IEG, and This is a quote that we use from them. It's sponsorship reaches people in an environment that matches their lifestyle rather than intrudes upon it. Sponsorship speaks to the public, not at them. The difference between sponsorship and advertising is that advertising is a push medium. You buy an ad in the paper, you buy a rink board, you buy a billboard outside, you buy a radio commercial. You tell people what they need to know, and the message is pushed out. There is no interaction. Sponsorship, when it's done right, has an engagement element to it and an interaction. Nobody goes to a Clippers game to look at the rink boards. The rink boards are intrusive and they interrupt the experience. Nobody listens to, I'm not going to Hockey Night in Canada, nobody listens to the football game last Saturday or last Sunday with Saskatchewan and Calgary and expects to turn it on to be able to watch the commercials. The commercials interrupt, and we all know what we do with advertising on TV. We get up, we PVR, we get a drink, we do whatever, we don't watch. So that's advertising. Sponsorship is when you engage people, whether it's at the festival, whether it's in Nick, whether it's at Canada Day, whether it's any other events that you have an experience in the programming that the sponsorship can get involved. This is the actual definition. It's when a cash or in-kind fee is paid to the city in return for the potential associated to the city. It's basically a business-to-business relationship. So some of the trending, this is the study that's done by a competitor of ours in conjunction with our national association. It's Trojan One that does, T1 agency that does the work on this. It's called Canadian Sponsorship Landscape Study. This is the 2019 study that came out in August. The industry, the sponsorship industry in Canada is a $2.5 billion industry. It's not a corner of the desk industry anymore. It is $2.5 billion. 14% of that $2.5 billion is spent on local sponsorships in market. 23% of corporate marketing budgets last year were spent in sponsorship and experiential marketing in Canada. That's basically saying that 1 for every $4 spent in marketing in Canada involves sponsorship or experiential marketing. There's a lot of money out there. So, and 78% of the decision makers for that $2.5 billion came from the marketing and communication departments, not from community investment departments. And that again shows that sponsorship is not about helping the city and their programs, it's about marketing through the city and their programs. This study was done by us and a company called Repucom that's now been bought up by Nielsen. This is a larger study. It was consumer sponsorship rankings. It's about 2,000 people coast to coast, telephone and online. And it was done, I think we did 3 or 4 years in a row, and the end result was that we pulled out, for the sake of this, just some of the information around municipalities. But the interesting thing was that 85% of Canadians during this survey had said that companies should be able to sponsor public places like hockey rinks, ballparks, all those sorts of things. The tide has turned a lot. When I was growing up, it was sell almond bars. Today it is, let's get the corporate sponsor instead. So that's a big shift. The other interesting thing is that 1 in 2 Canadians believe or don't believe that existing titled buildings should be renamed. So if a building is named after the first mayor or a councillor or a community benefactor or somebody like that, that those buildings should not be changed. I put that in because it doesn't shift one way or the other, but you should know that, I mean, if I was an elected official, I sure would want to be aware that what the general public thinks. The other interesting part is that 75% of Canadians said that if a company is a sponsor, they should not get preferential treatment for business opportunities with the city. So it has to be fair and honest and transparent. And where most municipalities and provincial governments are now going is to integrate their sponsorship program into their procurement purchasing protocols. So those are some of the ways that this is being done to make sure that it is fair and equitable, and that the municipality gets the best bang for the buck as a result of it. This study is done by a competitor of ours in Ottawa, the Centre for Excellence for Public Sector Marketing, who I'm actually meeting with when I fly down east later today. So this study was done I think 2 years ago, but 66% of municipalities are presently involved in sponsorship and marketing or some sort of form of corporate engagement. And 50% of those have been in this game for over 5 years. Arenas, recreations, complexes, sports fields, those are the most common naming opportunities that exist. And the most common assets are naming rights or alignment with programming or alignment with events. If we stop to look here at the city of Nanaimo, there's much more than building naming rights to some of our buildings like Nick 1, Nick 2, Nick Overall, the Nanaimo Aquatic Center, Cliff McNabb, Frank Crane, again, if you want to go there, and then the ballparks, soccer areas, that sort of stuff. But you've got to look beyond that when you start to get into sponsorship and naming rights opportunities, and you want to align with things like programming, or the great Concerts in the Park program that exists in the summertime, or youth programming, or children's programming. Those are all areas that offer opportunity for you to generate money, enhance programming, generate value of return on investment for your partners. So these are basically rhetorical questions, I'm hoping. Do you need additional taxes above, or revenues above taxes and user fees? Are users and citizens concerned about increasing tax rates and increasing user fees at their facilities? And do you own rinks, parks, leisure centers, performing arts centers, programming, etc.? Like I said, I'm hoping these are all rhetorical with an answer yes. Do you presently have sponsorship policy in place? And these are things that you need to think about. Do you know what you have to sell? Do you truly know what the list of assets are that you could sell from a marketing perspective? And what are they worth? Like if you were to go to market, how much money should you be getting? What effect would an additional $300,000 or $500,000 a year have on your present mill rate? And are you committed to doing sponsorship or just doing it ad hoc? Those are just some more thoughts that you should really have. The reality check is that you're already involved in sponsorship and advertising to some extent here in the city. Whether it's rink boards, whether it's tied to Canada Day, whether it's tied to different programming and events that are going on. So you're already doing it, but you're already doing it in an ad hoc way with no understanding of what the assets are actually worth or what other assets that you could sell. The question isn't really about do you want to be in the sponsorship game? The question is really about how do you want to be involved in the sponsorship game? Ad hoc, as you presently are, or at a more sophisticated and larger revenue opportunity approach. So it's critical to understand what you have to sell, what it's worth, and be able to show the value to your partners. You need to take tools to build internal capacity and have a team member that's out selling, or take a look at an external sales format. I mean, both work, both have their pros and cons. And some of our clients and a lot of companies that are, or cities that are clients of our competitors, they sometimes have a hybrid model. So for instance, in Beaumont, Alberta, they are presently, we're working with them. Our competitor did their inventory asset valuation. They have a list of everything they could sell. They have a list of all the stuff that what it's worth and how much money they should be getting. And we're working to train that team to go out and generate that money on a regular basis on an annual sponsorship program. At the same time, they're about to build a new aquatic center. And our answer was, you don't have the capacity to sell the naming rights on that building. So they've outsourced the naming rights on that specific building to a company based out of Toronto that's doing the sales for them. And then they will assume responsibility from that point on. So everybody's a little bit different. Here's a recipe for success that seems to work here in Canada with municipalities. Number one, you undertake what was called a feasibility study or an inventory asset valuation. It basically tells you what you have to sell and what it's worth and how much money you should be generating on an annual basis and how long it'll take to get there. Then you develop or update sponsorship, advertising, naming policy. So your policy needs to be updated if it exists. And if it doesn't exist, it needs to be written, but it needs to be aligned with everything from your donations policy to other commemorative naming policies to street naming policies, but also align with your bylaws because you've got signage bylaws. So in the city of Vancouver, when they started to move into sponsorship, they had to go back and look at their bylaw, which says that no building can have a corporate name on it bigger than like 2 feet by 1.5 feet. Don't see a lot of people putting $1 million up front to put their name on the building that nobody's ever going to see or know. So you need to make sure that your bylaws are integrated into those policies. Then you need to build a strategic plan. You can have all the knowledge you want, understand what you have to sell and what it's worth, but if you don't have a plan to monetize it, it was a waste of money to start with. And finally, go out and get the money. So those are the 4 steps. I'm just going to quickly go into each of them. If you did this feasibility study, the inventory asset takes about 16 to 20 weeks to do. It ranges in investment depending on what you're looking for, from $45,000 all the way up to about $350,000. A single building, so if you were to look at specifically just, hey, we just want to know what all the assets are inside the Nanaimo Aquatic Center and what the naming rights for all the different rooms and the pools and the areas and the associated programming are worth, you're probably talking somewhere around $45,000 to $60,000 to do that single building. If you looked at something like, for example, Cliff McNabb or the Nanaimo Ice Center and said, we're not interested in everything inside, we're just interested in if we were to sell the corporate naming rights on the outside, similar to the Port Theatre. So something like that, to figure out what that valuation is somewhere between $15,000 and $20,000. For the entire city of Nanaimo, if you were to do your parks, your programs, your culture, we just started City of St. Catharines yesterday, so it's probably about $95,000 just to do the entire city of all those assets, okay? That's your starting point. I estimate, and these numbers I won't stand by until I've actually done an inventory, same as our competitors. Until we actually have done the work, we can't say this is how much, but I'm guessing based on 30 years of doing this, 18 years with the company, and lots of municipalities, I'm guessing you're probably somewhere between the $350,000 to $500,000 in revenue a year. Then you need to build policy strategy and do some training. So policy, it has to have a delegation of authority. At what level does the person on the street selling able to sign off a deal? When does it go to the director? When does it go to the CAO? And when does it come to council? Because as council, you don't want to be involved in every $5,000 deal, but at the other end of the scale, you do want to be involved in a naming right, probably of a major center or a renaming of a building, those sorts of things. You need to have a delegation of authority in your policy. You need to know where the money's going to go. So all this money, this $500,000 that's coming in, where does it go? Does it go back to Cliff McNabb? Does it go to the general bucket in the same way taxes do? You have to figure out how that's going to work. You need to know, as I said, what role does council have? And does it jive with your other policies? And what about, for instance, your advertising policy, your donations policy, signage bylaws, all that stuff that I already mentioned. To do that, you're probably talking to build a policy about $10,000 to $20,000, depending on what the scope of the work is, that sort of stuff. It's essential to do your policy after your inventory asset valuation is done. Don't do it before. I watch municipalities do it before. It's really tough because how do you build policy on naming rights when you don't know what the value of your naming rights are? So I would encourage you to do it after. It takes 2 to 4 weeks to do that work. Strategy, how you're going to sell, who's going to sell, the process of selling, making sure that's relationship building. Again, the delegation of authority that goes in there, customization proposals as opposed to let me build a stock package and send it out to every business in town, sort of like throwing spaghetti against the wall and hoping some of it sticks. It's about trying to build relationships with the businesses, understand what their goals and objectives are, and then customizing a proposal that will help them achieve their marketing goals. So that's the customization part in the strategy. This will take 4 to 8 weeks typically to build. It costs anywhere from $20,000 to $35,000. Perhaps it's, more simplistic at the $28,000 or more complex at the other end. Just did some work for the city of Regina that has a 5-year projections. We actually did 10-year projections because we needed to give them advice on internal sales or external sales. And we had to show them, it looked really good to go external at 5 years. It looks really bad to have gone external at 10-year point. And we needed them to understand that. So those are some of the things that you want to look at. And then you go out and get the money. Are you going to build a team internally? You're going to have salaries then. You're going to have training costs to bring the team up to speed. You're going to have 3 to 5 years before you probably reach your expected level of revenue. Or you're going to use an external sales approach. So if we looked at all that stuff I just showed you, the inventory asset valuation and the report would be about $95,000, as I said. Policy's another 15, strategy's another 25. Mentoring time for your new team is about 15,000. So your outside costs, not including your own labor, your own staffing, is about $150,000. That's what your investment is to take this to market. We put a proposal in front of the city. Would have been, I'm not sure whether it was the last council or the council before, but we stuck to the same number. We would do all of that work, and you should be able to, whether it's us or anybody else, should be able to do it at that level. So you've got to, that's kind of the dollar figure that you're looking at. It's about 30% off. I like this cartoon. Basically, what if we don't change at all and something just magical happens? There's a revenue channel here. Municipalities are getting in the game. It's additional revenue, whether you put it to capital, whether you put it to maintenance, whether you put it to the bottom line. You have to determine what you have to sell, what is it worth, and how do you take it to market. So that would basically be it.
If I just may say, Mr. Bruce, and forgive me for saying this, Mr. Rudolph marketed you, and you don't disappoint.
Thank you.
Councillor Sherman.
Thank you, Worship. To you, Mr. Root. Just a little background. A couple of us on the council here are, actually 3 of us, belong to Road Club in Nanaimo North, and our project that we're working on is to redo the Log Park boathouse and washroom facility. So a couple of questions came to mind during your presentation. First of all, this is free advice. No, just kidding. First of all, in your experience, has there been much uptake of a combination of a corporate sponsorship along with a service club sponsorship with regard to naming portions of the building?
Through the chair, so absolutely, and I did sit down with 2 members of your club who have already taken me for an extensive lunch, which I think was a muffin and a coffee, and yeah, and we specifically spoke about it before the announcement was recently made, and I also sent them an email afterwards giving them my thoughts. But in answer to your question, absolutely. There's lots, project we did in Calgary I was sitting on the Rotary Clubs of Calgary, a team that negotiated a deal with the City Parks Foundation, which was naming of what's called the Greenway, which is basically a ring road, but a bike path, walking path around the entire city of Calgary. And it was done by, it's now called the Rotary Mattamy Greenway. And that's, so the Rotary Clubs of Calgary combined with Mattamy builder and developer. So.
The second question is, and this one probably is a little more difficult to answer, but you referred to naming existing buildings, bringing in whatever amount of money is per year. What about a project like this one where we're looking for investment in the actual construction of the building? Is there a kind of a ballpark percentage of the total investment that one could conceivably go after, or is it totally dependent on what the project is and where it is?
So through the chair, 2 answers to your question, because the first approach, and as I told Ian, my realtor, and the other fellow that we had lunch with, the donut or the muffin, that when we sat down, I said, you have two approaches. One is philanthropic, and if the boathouse and the clubs are going to go out and look for money, and somebody's going to put a name on the building, if it's corporate, then if they want to make a donation, they can't get their name on the building. And if they do put their name on the building, the value has to be determined. Because if they give the clubs, let's say they say, here's $100,000. I told both gentlemen when we sat down, the naming rights are probably worth about at most $10,000 a year. So that would have to be a 10 or 20 year naming to be able to get their value out of it. So if they gave you $500,000, Revenue Canada is going to be a little concerned, because if it's written off as a marketing expense, they get to write off $500,000 as an operating expense before they figure out what their taxes are. If they write it off as a naming right on a donation, they can't put their name on it, so where's the value? If they're completely altruistic and just want to give the money, that's cool. So I think you need to be really cautious how you do that. If you want money to build the building, that's philanthropy or underwriting. It's not corporate sponsorship. Corporate sponsorship is, what is the exposure that I'm getting and what is it worth? So the comparison would be a full-page ad for your business in the local newspaper. If the full-page ad is $3,000, you give them $3,000. You can't tell them how to spend the $3,000, nor do you get to have a whole bunch of extra stuff. You get the full page ad. That's what you paid for the exposure, and the $3,000 was determined on the number of eyeballs that were going to see the newspaper. That's the marketing side. Does that help answer the question? It is tricky, you're right, because it's, how do you ask for the money? There's three ways.
Councillor Hammonds.
Thank you. A few slides back, there was one that said for the entire city of Nanaimo, it would be $95,000. Can you explain that and what that would look like?
So if we did, and I'm just going to, through the chair, sorry. If we were to look at just Nanaimo Aquatic Center, that building to do all the work inside and out, determine what all the assets are from the programming side, the name of the pool, the naming right to the building itself, all of those just for the Nanaimo Aquatic Center would probably be $45,000 to $60,000, somewhere in there. If we were to do the entire city, there's an economy of scale for us. So that would include the Nanaimo Aquatic Center, the Nanaimo Ice Center, Frank Crane, Cliff McNabb, ballparks, trails, the golf course at Babin. I think that's yours, right? The arts, arts community, everything that you own. So the city of St. Catharines that we started on yesterday is actually, it's got their trails, it's got all of those things. So that's why it's $95,000. Does that make sense?
It does, thank you. And a follow-up if I may. I understand from Mr. Rudolph that a previous council had this presentation. Do we know the rationale for turning it down?
Well, maybe Councillor Thorpe can answer that question. Longer serving.
Probably coming.
Didn't say older. No, yeah.
Thank you.
So during the previous council, there was certainly talk of the fact that we did not and do not really have a sponsorship policy, and there was frustration around that. To be honest, I don't recall hearing Mr. Barut's presentation, and I know Mr. Barut slightly, so I would recall it. So I don't think we've had the presentation during the last council, maybe the one before that, before my term, but otherwise I would say no. So if I may just add that there have been sort of informal, occasionally discussions that, gee, we should pursue this, we should look at a policy when ad hoc opportunities arose. So.
Through the chair.
Councillor Thorpe, I wonder if there's anyone else.
Mr. Bruce probably could answer the question.
Through the chair, thank you. So you're right. Initially, back in 2014, we had done a presentation to council, and then we were hired by administration to deliver a series of workshops for staff and the community at large. So a lot of the not-for-profits, the charities from the whole region were engaged in, I think it was four full-time, full-day workshops. The next council had us present. It was actually in council chambers at the conference center, and that was just an updated information. That council, I don't know the reasons why, but they chose not to pursue it at that point in time. There had been a discussion around when I had spoken to one councillor that we should be able to do this on our own. We don't need to do that sort of thing. So. That was all that I can tell you. But we did present in the last council, and you might not have been there. So, does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through to Mr. Brutes. I saw your presentation at FCM. I'm glad you're here now to make it again. I noticed at the time that a lot of cities, even smaller cities than Nanaimo, were bringing in a lot of income, revenue, which I'm gathering, were using as just general revenue for the most part. When we go through this process, or when a city goes through this process, what sort of feedback does the city councillors and staff get from the general public who may or may not want their arena renamed to somebody else, or even the concept of doing it?
Through the chair, very good question. It's critical. I tell all of our clients, sponsorship is nothing more than great communication. If you can't communicate well, it will fail. And so, for example, in the city of Vancouver, when we were doing that, they did local focus groups. In Kelowna, when we were doing it, prior to the inventory being developed, there was a session with the not-for-profits, the charities that were engaged with the city from the perspective that, let's get your input. What do you think about the city taking a look at this? So it was done as a feasibility study. It wasn't done as we're getting into the sponsorship and naming business. We're looking at it and how it will benefit the city and its partners. So for example, in Kelowna, they are working a ratio with the football club that really generates quite a bit of money out of the football stadium. And the end result is that if the city was to say, no, we're selling that now, they're going to have to increase their grants anyway. So it's working with them. So in each of the cases, every municipal, City of Summerside, PEI, they actually did a series of workshops afterwards to engage the community organizations to give them the tools to be able to go out and be successful as well. So each municipality is a little bit different. We would encourage, and we always do to our clients, that they do have an engagement done with the community itself. So, there we go.
Sure. Just one more question. Getting back to the economies of scale, your 95,000, which you're, I don't take a direct quote or anything, but is that all in? At the end of it, we have a policy and we're moving forward. It doesn't, I'm guessing, include, say, a third party doing the sales, an outside sales force? Or does that?
Through the chair, you are correct. It would be everything other than an external or your own staff. So if we go back to that, so this one, you would end up with the report and the inventory and the spreadsheets, and it would tell you what you've got to sell, what it's worth. It would include a finished policy. It would include a strategy. It would also include 40 hours of our time or our competitors' time, whoever you hire, to actually help you to implement the strategy, because there's nothing worse than sort of letting the consultants disappear and you're wondering what you're doing. So, so that's everything that would be included. Your costs above and beyond that would be ongoing operating costs. So those would be your, what I would call capital costs, or your investment. Your ongoing costs would then be fulfillment costs, your staffing costs, and your or external sales costs. Okay.
One more if I may, thank you. And the other thing is, and again, the economies of scale, have you ever done one of these projects that included working with the school district in the geographical area so that you are giving this mapping for all the facilities?
We have never done it directly. We have done it indirectly. So in Grand Prairie, we were doing work. It was a joint building property, which was a school with school board, but it had had soccer fields that the city owned. It was city land, and then on top of that, it had a facility like a YMCA type facility involved, which was city owned and operated, and an arena. We also did the same in Calgary at Fish Creek, which included the YMCA, the arena, the library, the Catholic high school, and the community association. So it has been done, but it hasn't been, typically it's one undertaking to engage us and doing all the work, and then, so for example, the work in St. Catharines right now is the city of St. Catharines overall, and the Niagara region specifically for 3 buildings. Separate, one contract with the city. We answer to 2 masters, so to speak, yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, if I may, Mr. Brutes, thank you very much. Very interesting information. Appreciate your being here, and thanks to Mr. Rudolph for arranging that. Certainly this topic has come up at previous council, as I indicated, but we have only talked about it on an ad hoc basis and never moved anything forward, which the only thing that did put it that way. But I think this presents certainly a great opportunity that I hope this council will at least discuss and have further conversations about. My question goes to the sales part of the campaign, and it seems to me that for most of the opportunities for sponsorship, it would involve fairly large companies with big bucks they would want to spend on sponsorships. And so you would be dealing probably not with a local company as much as corporate head office back east. Is that the case?
Through the chair, there would be, I wouldn't say Nanaimo is going to get a lot of money out of Toronto, Bay Street, even out of Vancouver for that matter. There will be some regional money. You're right, it will be local money. It will also be, and when we stop to look at it, there are some fairly big businesses in town, but there are some smaller ones too. So I'll give you an example that the town of Morinville, so just north of Edmonton, well, north of St. Albert and which is north of Edmonton, they're talking about a single building. At present, they're generating about $300,000 a year out of that building. There is one fairly large sponsor, still under $100,000, so it's not over a third of this revenue, and that's Pembina Pipelines, because their pipeline runs under the city, or the town, so they have a pretty good obligation to want to make their presence known. The rest of it is local developers. I mean, and again, that comes back to where you're going with this, but developers have, they want to sell their properties once they build them. So this is a great marketing tool to be in the ranks, to be in the tied to the community locally, all those sorts of things. You've got companies like Coastal Credit Union, you've got Tilray in town, so there's a lot of local businesses, and once we start looking regionally, you can expand from there. I don't think, and we were talking a little earlier about the Scotiabank barn that's going in on the Lower Mainland, the population that's there is large, sure. Scotiabank, TD, TELUS, they're all interested in that market. This is a smaller market. It has to be done differently. So when we look at Summerside PEI as another example, it's 14,000 people. It's the second largest city on the island of PEI. They do have a credit union, a regional credit union that named the building, and the rest of their sponsors are local. So whoever looks at the report and the strategy and builds those, should be looking at who you need to be talking to. And there's different ways of doing it. Consultants can provide their knowledge and insight. We're doing quite a bit of work for clients right now that's utilizing, in actual fact, is utilizing big data to determine specifically who you should be talking to based on empirical data as opposed to some consultants' beliefs. So.
Thank you very much. That's good to know. My second question may be in the weeds a little bit, but I'm just curious, terms of agreements for sponsorships. Can you speak to that? What is typical? Is it a 10-year term, a 50-year term, a forever term, which I doubt? How does that work?
Through the chair, thank you very much. Good question. It's the forever terms, the perpetuity, are long gone, whether they're naming rights philanthropically or otherwise. Typically, if somebody is being named a commemorative naming of a building, if you choose to, as a city, to commemoratively name a building after, somebody like Diana Krall Square or something like that. The end result is we would urge that it's a 40-year term, means perpetuity, because that's the average life of a building. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Once you go down that road away from philanthropy or commemorative naming, either of those two channels, and you go into corporate sponsorship, typically your naming rights should not be over 10 years. They could be 10 years with a 10-year option or 10 years with 5-year option. We try to encourage our clients to make sure and we work on both sides of the fence. So we have clients that are corporate brands and sponsors, and we help them make the right investments in places like the city of Nanaimo or wherever else. And we also have clients like yourselves that are selling sponsorships. And that's one of the reasons we don't sell, because it's a conflict of interest. So we advise and we're consultants from that and provide tools. But in that case, when you've got the scenario that you've got naming rights, we would urge our clients, whether they're on the buyers or the sellers side, that they shouldn't be over 10 years, because a lot happens in today's world in 5 to 10 years. It shouldn't be anything less than 5 years if it's a naming right on a building, because it takes time to build the halo, to be able to, if it's already named building, to get rid of the previous halo that was on it. At the same time, you can then plan out your marketing over a 5 or a 10-year term. And as a municipality or not-for-profit, charity, whatever, that you've got stability on that side. And so the city of Kelowna, they named their dog parks, and it was a 1-year term, and the guy ain't coming back. And they unfortunately had a couple of errors. One was, and they'll speak to this term, I'm not talking out of turn here. So the first one was that it was a 1-year term with a naming right, which didn't result in good end results. Number two is that the city agreed to pay for the signage. And so they're actually losing money on the deal. So if you're going to do a naming right, like with a physical building or place or whatever, I would say it's a minimum of 5 years. Typically in the industry, as you would have seen from Bernie Coulterman's study from up here, typically they're 5 to 10 years. If it's a sponsorship, we're going to be aligned with the Canada Day event, or we're going to be tied with Mom and Tot Swim in the programming at the pools, then those might be a year, might be 2 years, might be 3 years, probably nothing over 3 or 5 years. Does that help?
Yes,
Okay.
indeed. Thank you.
Councillor Gasselbrock. Anyone else? Thank you very much. That was a very interesting presentation. And I'm just crass and greedy enough to second Councillor, he wasn't being greedy. Second Councillor Thorpe's suggestion. This is a valuable presentation, and Councillor Bonner, I think, had an opportunity to hear you earlier, and I think this is an opportunity in the city. It behooves the city on behalf of its citizens to carefully consider the possibility of bringing in extra revenue that might assist paying for all the many programs that the good citizens of Nanaimo expect to preserve. Mr. Rudolph.
Your Worship, a good part of the reason today was just put it on the table for discussion. Not expecting any specific direction from the council. However, I guess we really wanted to test your appetite for exploring this further without necessarily any commitments. there's a couple paths to go forward on this. Direct us to prepare a staff report on this, outlining basically kind of what we've heard and some financial options moving forward. Timing of that is interesting because we are getting into budget. So there could be a shorter term opportunity, or we take our time and work our way through what will be more of a longer process. So if there's an appetite to have at least some information available for budget consideration this year, we will certainly do that. Otherwise, we would proceed through a normal sequence of discussions with you and see where it goes from there. So it's really, is there an interest? And if there is an interest, what would be your desire for moving forward, at least for an exploratory purpose? To throw it into the budget conversation, or throw it into the longer term conversation, which would push us probably into a longer conversation on this. Maybe you think that some of the comments were wise, that it's necessary to understand the engagement side of this as well, because there's others that may have a difference in this or have some sensitivities around it. So it's not all necessarily just revenue generation. There's issues around naming and that type of thing, and you'll encounter differences of opinion. And if this becomes a bit of a threat to somebody's revenue source or that type of thing, you'd have to be careful about that. That would never be an intentional thing. So I just think you need to have, is there an openness to at least consider it, and then finding a path forward that is safe and appropriate.
Councillor Gusselbach, then Councillor Hemmons.
So my preference would be to have a slower discussion. I understand the revenue generating aspects of this, and it's quite a nuanced discussion. What sponsorship looks like and which companies and what shows up in many different ways. I think it's a sharp tool, and I think municipalities are being put into a position of having to go seek corporate sponsorship to increase revenues, and that's a larger discussion on why are we in this situation. My initial reaction is one of fear, seeing our city turn into a billboard, and I know that is probably a little bit reactive, but seeing the sponsorship of Fortis at the ADICC, UBCM, it's very effective marketing. That's why 75% of the budgeting comes from marketing, because it has an impact on people's choices, and also can distort people's decisions on where they're going to use their purchasing power. And I think if we want to be effective in developing a strong local economy, we need to be very careful on how we proceed with something like this. So I prefer to have the necessary discussions to get into the nuances of this and look at all the potential impacts before we embark on pursuing anything. And I appreciate the presentation, and this is an opportunity that I'd like to remain open to and seeing what is the widest way forward. Thank you.
Councillor Hemmons and Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you. Following on Ben's comments, this initially makes me quite uncomfortable. But with that said, I would appreciate further information in the form of a staff report. I support kind of a longer view, not looking for this year's budget. And for me, it would be incredibly important that we keep the community involved in this, because that's going to be our litmus test whether this is going to go or not. So,
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. I tend to agree also with Councillor Gusselbach. I'm certainly interested in seeing us pursue some discussions down this road. I don't see it as being realistic or anything to affect the coming, and I don't see the need to hurry to do that, but I'd certainly like to have longer term discussions about this, and I think how far we decide to proceed or not proceed, we can determine at what level we want to engage with sponsorship. So I think it's a conversation that we should certainly initiate.
Anyone else? Councillor Bonner.
I'm more of a faster sort of fellow. But if the majority of the council wants to proceed this way, I'm fine with that. I would just hope that we would maybe possibly put it on GPC if we want to have that conversation, get it out there, and invite anybody else in. I'm kind of curious what we could possibly get if we rename Mount Benson.
I must admit, I prefer to be a whippet in this than a pug. I think, and I'm going to state this quite candidly, we have sponsorship already. If you go to the arena and you see the names of law firms and donut places and everything else, to suggest somehow that we are innocent of the marketing world would be a bit of a stretch. And this is, for me, it has some deep philosophical consequences, I understand that. But we have a duty to the citizens of this community to try and raise as much revenue as we reasonably can to ensure that they receive the services that they certainly want and deserve, about which we receive numerous requests week in, week out. What's the rest of the morning? It's about spending money, including the BMX track, to ensure that young people have appropriate places to recreate, as opposed to, getting involved in what is it Granny would have said, the devil finding mischief for idle hands. And so I think we have to look at this very seriously on behalf of the citizens, and we should not let this, and I say this with respect to everybody, be terribly colored by our particular personal philosophical views. I was never a fan of the expansion of casinos in our province, but I've certainly seen the benefit of the money that's flowed to this city and to the province of British Columbia from that gaming revenue. Did it encourage addictive behavior? I have no idea whether you can draw a perfect line, but we certainly use that revenue. We use revenue from all kinds of sources that may be somewhat unpleasant, but I think it behooves us as council to look at this. My sense is, unless I hear from somebody else, that it's the go-slow approach. But I think, Mr. Rudolph, you heard this morning that people wish to proceed to look at this in a serious way. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Worship. I agree with Councillor Bonner. I think my philosophy in business was that I never wanted to be first in line on a new project, but I definitely did not want to be last. So second or third was a good position. So with that said, I think we would be doing our citizens a disfavor by not investigating this further and in a timely fashion, as opposed to sometime down the road we'll do. That won't work, in my opinion. So do we need a motion? Or should we wait till GPC?
I don't think we need a motion. I think Mr. Rudolph has his hand.
We're building an agenda schedule for GPC into the new year now, and that would give time, and then there would be some financial options. Should you choose to move any part of this or anything forward next year, there would always be options to do that presented to you. So the idea really today was just to put it on the table. And it just happened to coincide with Mr. Bruce's schedule today, and it's, so it's all good. So I appreciate I think the feedback we're hearing from council is indicative of the feedback you'll hear from the community on this, and so I think you want to make sure you're covering all your bases there. And everybody's right on this. I think it's just, what is the right path for us to go forward? So we would come to a GPC with us and an overview, a report, and lay out what we understand our assets are and that type of thing, without going full. Any involvement we've currently have right now, which includes the conference center and other assets, and programming, certainly through Parks and Rec and Culture Department. There's a long history of philanthropic and sponsorship involvement, so it's not that we're not involved, we are, but it is, and there is policy within that department that they're following, so we'll put it all on the table for you, and appreciate the opportunity to have Mr. Boots here today, and at least open the door for conversation.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, if I may, Your Worship. I just want to clarify, I certainly did not mean to suggest that I wanted this put off for a lengthy period of time. I agree with Councillor Bonner and Councillor Turley to the extent that I think it's worth investigating in a timely way. And I certainly feel that it would be worth it, and this is my personal opinion, worth proceeding with talking about a feasibility study, because we need to then develop policy. As the mayor has indicated, we already have advertising happening throughout the city, and I think we need a consistent policy on where we're going with that and how to benefit the most from it. So I certainly, again, am in favor of proceeding with discussions around this.
Thank you. I mean, when we gather next time at the Shaw Auditorium next to the Port Theatre, give appropriate consideration of this policy. Mr. Bruce, thank you very much for your presentation this morning. I must say, from a business and an ethical perspective, a very balanced and fair approach. Well done. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I know.
President, Vancouver Symphony, and Margot Holmes, CEO of Vancouver Symphony. And Ms. Smith, you're going to be introducing this. Certainly not Mr. Harding.
Thank you, Your
Please,
Worship.
if you could pay attention. Thank you.
Is this on? Thank you, Your Worship. I'll invite Dave Whitty, President, Vancouver Island Symphony, and Margot Holmes, CEO of Vancouver Island Symphony. They have a request for additional funding for Vancouver Island Symphony.
Okay, apparently we can't use a PowerPoint.
We could have if we would have had it earlier, because we have to protect the viruses and that type of thing.
Councillor Shirley?
Yes, Your Worship, before we start, I just want to point out that my wife is on the symphony board. However, I will not stay for any votes, but I would like to listen to this.
I completely understood Councillor Turley, and this is just a presentation this morning, so one we're looking forward to.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's unfortunate. Okay. So, we're going to do a tag team here today and appreciate the opportunity to come before you. Margot Holmes is our CEO of Vancouver Island Symphony, and I have the honor to be the president. Those of you on council have seen me do a number of PowerPoints, maybe a change that I'm not doing that. What we're going to do is have a brief overview of the history of the symphony. What are some of the key drivers for our organization, our contribution to Nanaimo, and our financial picture, and then we do have an app. This is our 25th anniversary, and unlike a lot of symphonies in the country, it's really unusual actually for a symphony to be created within the past 25 years and flourish. And so unlike the trend across much of North America, we're here. We've become actually not just another symphony, but we have become a professional orchestra. There's a long tradition of orchestras in the city, but we are now, for the last 25 years, a professional orchestra. And we have become one of the most renowned regionals in the country. That tends to fly under the radar, but that is the case. And so we are more vibrant than ever, but like our colleagues across the country, we're challenged. And part of the reason is the entertainment dollars move significantly. From the 50s, when they attended more cultural events such as ours, now it's really directed more to sports, and so that money's gone elsewhere, and so we're constantly, but here we are. And there are the people in our audience who are sitting there. So how have we changed? And Margot's going to talk a bit about that, and as I say, we'll do a bit of a
Thanks, Dave. So we are constantly looking at new trends for symphony orchestras. It's one of my things that I want to know what research says. And so these are a couple of things that might be of interest. The number one reason that people attend a symphony concert in Canada, this is Canadian research from 2018, is to de-stress. The second reason is to learn something new. And the third reason is to have connections with other people. So using that research, we've started to develop how do we develop new audience, started to look at how do we develop new audience. So in the last 6 years, we've gone from doing 7 performances to 14. And this is really a trend because we've discovered a need in the community where people, some people don't want to drive at night anymore. Some people want daytime activities. So all of those 7 new shows are 1-hour shows that take place in the afternoon or early evening, late afternoon, mid-afternoon, and they all have a food component. That's a social interaction component. And so we've seen that these are working. We've done our Symphony Soundbites, which are our happy hour concerts for the last 3 years, and audience is growing. And we've started our 1-hour matinees, Friday matinees, 2 years ago, and that audience is also growing. It's also allowed us to work with communities or organizations in our community through our Heartstrings program. So those concerts are a little more relaxed. So people like Vancouver Island Mental Health, Bill's Place, Nanaimo Brain Injury, Mind Matters Nanaimo, Multicultural Society, and Nanaimo Hospice all bring their clients to these concerts now. We started with 3 organizations last year, and we now are at 6. And there's a waiting list for more people to come in. So it shows us that there's a need, and that they keep coming back over and over, that these clients during those afternoon shows. I mentioned our happy hour symphony sound bites, our 1-hour shows as well, that are driving a younger demographic, which is also our goal, so that the orchestra will be able to thrive down the way. And that when I say a younger audience, I'm talking 35 to 50. So people come after work, they go to a show, and they're home to tuck their kids in for bed. Excuse me. The other things that we're working on are symphony community partnerships. And we are doing these really through rehearsals and through offering a different welcome to people. We've been examining that as an organization, and so some of those community partnerships are inviting people in that would traditionally not be part of what we do. Nanaimo Physicians Association, CORE, they're part of our partnership this year. We have a yoga event later this week, which has 60 people coming to do yoga and then going into the rehearsal afterwards. And there's a waiting list for 22 people. So obviously that's a popular event that is brand new, but again, a different welcome, trying to bring people in a different way. We had Girl Guides Night last month at the Symphony, and then we have Choir Night in January. So these are just different things that we're trying to practice based on our research to make our organization thrive. One final thing I'll mention is a big partnership that we started 5 years ago is Festival Nanaimo. We created it, coordinated it as a driver for tourism in the month of March. And we got all of our community partners together, and that festival continues this year for year 6. And we're really talking about 15 to 18 community partners that participate during the month and over 50 events. So we're proud of that event, and we're now in year 6. Dave?
Yeah, thanks, Margo.
You know what? I'm going to do more of these without PowerPoint. Thanks, Jake. This is great. We have been working hard at creating a revised vision, and you know, we all have taglines. Our tagline is creating a thriving musical experience, and we have an action plan in place for the next 3 years. And we talk about partnerships, community engagement, and relevance. So interesting, think about a symphony, right? So your 3 primary actions are partnerships, community engagement, and relevance. We've got the music nailed down. We got that nailed down. We're good. We are good. And so now we're building on that goodness, if you will. Our value proposition is this, and you've heard me talk about this a gazillion times. So those to the converted, I apologize. Successful cities build on 5 pillars, right? Build environment, economic, environmental, social, and the cultural side. And the culture, I said at the last, not in alphabetical order, because that's what we want to talk about here. The cultural pillar, in our view, is key to attracting and retaining the mobile creative class. Surprise, surprise, we're talking about attracting the creative class. But you know, we do have a major role in attracting the creative people to Nanaimo, and thereby actually assisting the city in its tech sector ambitions. That is actually a fact. Literature demonstrates that, it links it. So when you think about, towards the end of our presentation, think about the BIS, and not just delivering music, but in actually building a foundation in the city that a lot of other cities don't have. People come to Nanaimo, anecdotal maybe, they come to Nanaimo, many people have said this to me, because you had a symphony. We're moving to Vancouver Island, and then we said, okay, where do we want to live? Victoria, it's got all those amenities, but it's at the end of the island. We wanted to be more mid-island. The only symphony, and we love symphony, we love that idea, we came here. I had one fellow come up to me, lived in Detroit, Victoria, he's a professional. He said to me, you know what, I've attended symphonies in both places. I had season tickets for the Detroit Symphony. This is a better symphony. It's the best symphony of the three. Didn't have to pay him to say that. That's what he said. So the value proposition continued. In terms of community engagement, we have a 3-step integrated music education program. So we're out there. We take this commitment seriously. We have yearly offerings to grade 4 education concert program across all grade 4 students in School District 68. For $1 a child from School District 68, it costs a lot more to do it than that. So we actually contribute some of our revenue towards facilitating that program. And some of you in the room know about that because you've had grade 4 students go through that program. We've created a children's choir so kids can sing with a symphony. And we also send a symphony musician to school program across School District 68. So every school gets one of our musicians in to actually share in doing workshops. More value proposition. We have Symphony Community Days, free events twice a year at the Port Theatre during Saturday dress rehearsal, where citizens from across the community with their kids can come and actually try out their music instrument zoo. Festival Nanaimo, which Margot has talked about, is really a key part of what we've done as well, and then our Heartstrings program, which she described as well. And over the past 25 years, listen to these numbers. We've sold 111,000 season tickets, 111,000. 55,000 students have heard the Symphony and Education program. 55,000. 68,000 people have attended free symphony community activities. 500 visits to schools plus have been made by musicians. 500 nights of use and income over the past 14 years directed to the Port Theatre. This is no small potatoes. Like, we're a major player here. We've been too quiet about that. Too quiet. We are a significant player in this community, and we need your support so we can carry on. The other thing we've done, and we've actually had to pause, is the Symphony by the Sea. So we did it for 2000, from 2000 to 2010, and 2012 to 2018. And we couldn't do it this fall. It was a free symphony in Maffeo Sutton Park. We had 2,000 to 6,000 per concert there. And I got a little image there. You would have seen the people all packed out, sitting in their chairs, and you know what? They throw in a bit of coin. A lot of people can't do that. That's fine. Welcome. Sit down, enjoy this. And we have people come in, wander in with their kids, and it's something we were able to do. We can't do it anymore. We can't afford it financially. And it's a really important, I think, part of welcoming people in our community and recognizing not everybody can afford to do what we do in this room. Our economic impact, we have an economic impact too. So it's not just that kind of cultural, that good feeling stuff we're doing. We spend $54,000 annually for rent and services to the Port Theatre. $54,000. They need us. Our payroll is $600,000. We think it probably creates an economic impact of about $1.2 million. For hotel stays, 1,000 hotel rooms annually from our ticket holders and from our other community members and from our orchestra folks who have to come from outside Nanaimo to provide their wonderful expertise. Meals, we have all kinds of meals here to people, patrons who come and stay overnight. They actually stay overnight and attend our concert, and as well as the musicians. And it's a significant number as well. We've hit $1 million in our operating for our first time this year. And in 2018, when I became board chair, we had the structural deficit. Now, I've been an academic. Most of you know me as an academic. I spent a quarter of my life as a senior partner in a couple of really cool firms, consulting. And so I understand the business model, right? And we have the structural deficit. I don't like structural deficits, right? They just sit there on your shoulder. They're there every year. They nag at you. And you say to the board, you know what, we're going to take care of this. And we did. It's $85,000 gone. Took it off the books, raised funds, gone. So we addressed our structural deficit. So we're serious about what we're doing. We balanced our books now. So we're in good shape, but we're always looking to the future. Our budget is derived from 25% government investment, of which $89,000 comes from the city. That has not increased in 8 years. Has not increased in 8 years. And that kind of hurts us, right? Canada Council actually just increased in recognition of the good work we're doing. We're the only orchestra We went from $11,000 this coming year to $60,000. The only one in the country. They said, we love what you're doing. Your community outreach is exceptional. Others could learn from you. So they said, we're going to put our money where our mouth is needed. BC Art Council is 20 grand, gaming, 80 grand. 35% is from ticket sales. The rest is 40% comes from fundraising, donations, bequests, sponsorships. We're working the crowd all the time. You know, that's what we have to do. And sometimes it's, you know, I don't mind asking, never have, so we'll go out there and do it, but still, you can't keep asking forever. So the last major increase from the city was in 2010. That peaked at 96,000 K, and it was kind of an odd year, and then it dropped back. And in 2012 and since, the average yearly contribution has been $88,000. In 2019, as I mentioned, it was $89,244. So it's been flat. And we've been kind of quiet about that, but you know what? I think it's time to say, if we want the symphony here, people have to step up, and the city has to step up as well. So our ask is this: given our significant contribution to the cultural health of Nanaimo, to the role as an attractor of the creative class, and well-endowed retirees, our economic stimulus to the economy, so those areas, we're asking for 3 things. Priority 1, an increase in our operating grant from 89,000 K, again, it's been flat, to 120 K for 2020, 2021. So no increase since 2010. Priority 2, 30,000 K to permit us to offer Symphony by the Sea in 2020. That's what it costs. And creation of a line item in the city annual budget cycle to provide VIS with a better sense of budget commitment. Because we need to know.
What was the third thing?
A line item. So a fixed line item in the budget, so we need to know. Because we can't keep doing what we're doing. So if we want the symphony to stay around, we need your help. And we need an increase. And I would say to you that if you ran the numbers, and I was going to do this, I did, but if you ran the numbers, over that 10-year period cost of living, it's pretty close to what we're asking for. We're basically asking to put us where we should be. Thank you. Do you want to answer any?
That's a question.
Okay, no more PowerPoints. I love it.
I must say, Mr. Reedy, Ms. Holmes, that you don't need a PowerPoint. Any questions? Councillor Gesselbrock and Councillor Bonner, please.
Thank you, Worship. Through you, just to comment, I'm just heartened to hear about the community engagement. That's really lovely that they're going into the schools and engaging kids and playing music. It's the most important thing to be able to get together and do that. So great work on the engagement. Thank you.
Thank you. And I might say that it's interesting. We've done a lot of research. We have a proposition paper we've written. It's got 20 pages. And so we looked at, through some of the good work that Margot does in her networking in the country, and also what's going on in the U.S. And what the symphonies in the U.S. in particular that are now becoming successful, they're actually starting to do what we've been doing for the last few years, the education outreach stuff. So we're actually ahead of the game. I'm really proud of that. And that's before I arrived in the board. I'm really proud of that. And that's the good work of Margot and previous board.
Just if I may, a question. In terms of demographics of ticket holders and attendees, have you seen that shift, or what is the current demographic, and what are you hoping for in terms of expanding it, just in terms of relevancy for the younger generation?
Well, all symphonies, you know, it's considered something for older people. So that's something we've been trying to change with these new concert formats, the 1-hour concert formats. So we always have about 15% attrition each year on our season ticket holders. And so that is the purpose of bringing in, you know, something like happy hour soundbites. So what we've seen with those shows, they start at, you come for appetizer bites, and then at 5:30 you go in for a 1-hour show. Or you can come at 7:15 to 8:15 for a show, and then go for dessert bites afterwards. What we've seen is a third of that audience is now the under 50, and it's a younger. You see the younger people in the lobby, and so a third is younger, a third is our season ticket holders, and a third is just our regular people that maybe like Symphony. So I feel like we're progressing most definitely in the work that we're doing. It's not an overnight experience, but it's, you know, it's going to take a few years to see real results. But we are measuring it. So
Great.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's unfortunate that Symphony by the Sea wasn't able to go. I remember working with the Symphony quite a few years ago, providing the cannons for one of the symphonies that love blowing stuff up.
First year, that was the first year.
Yes. And so, just out of curiosity, how much does it cost to put on that event?
It depends on how many musicians we have, but it's about $40,000 to put it on. So.
And if we were to increase the amount that you're getting and put it on as a line item, which I wouldn't be opposed to, would we be bringing that back?
Well, I identify that as the second item. If the 120 really catches us up, because we're scrambling. I'm telling you, we spend a lot of time worrying about balancing the books at the end of the year. And so we have to scratch a lot. We're working hard at that. And you know what? At some point, if we don't see commitment broadly, I just think it just becomes more challenging. So the 120 ask is to really recognize we haven't had an increase for 10 years. In fact, it went from 96 down to 85. And then it crawled along and it averaged at 88. So that's what the 120 is. The 30 is so we can deliver Symphony by the Sea. And, we'll have to put some money in and raise some cash and sponsors to do that. Yeah, that's the only way it can happen. But we thought if the city saw that as an important contribution for the vitality of the city, then we can build sponsors. And ideally, we would move to hopefully sponsorship for that in the long term. And we've done some asks. We had one we thought close, and then we made some changes corporately, and so that drifted away. So it's not like we're working hard at that. But we have 3 asks today here now.
Anyone else? Thank you very much appreciated, and I can't resist, recognizing that some people have suggested older people go to symphonies. That this was a community that in its school programs had wonderful music programs that helped give us Diana Krall and Ingrid Jensen. And I think you can argue that the end result of good school programs around music and the opportunity for music leads to first-rate symphonies. And if we can beat Detroit, sounds good to me. So thank you very much for the presentation. Very much appreciated. Mr. Rudolph.
Worship, because it was a financial ask, is something that we would be putting forward for your budget consideration on the 25th. So our 2 days of presentations of business plans are the 20th and 22nd, and then you'll reconvene the following Monday in the morning, and you'll go through a summary of budget as well as any additional items that are being brought forward, and I think there's probably a couple other ones as well you'll see. So that would be your time to discuss the add-on to the budget.
Excellent, thank you. The next is reports. 2020 Finance and Audit Committee, key date calendar. Ms. Curry.
Thank you, Your Worship. This key date calendar is for 2020 for the Finance and Audit Committee. It has the same day of the third Wednesday of each month from 9 to 12 in this room unless otherwise specified. And it's just to set the baseline dates and times for these meetings. And as you will see coming up in the next couple of weeks, there is always the ability to add additional meetings and or cancel meetings if necessary. So this calendar is just for your approval.
Councillor Hammond.
Move the recommendation.
Sorry. Second by Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion?
Worship, just we've had a conflict with our schedule here in the Chamber of Commerce monthly luncheons, and so I think the Chamber has taken upon themselves to move theirs 1 week ahead, and then so that's one of the reasons that it's been hard to attend some of their lunches. So they are adjusting their calendar. They're probably doing it anyway, but it's helpful for us to want to attend the lunches. So noteworthy.
Thank you to the Chamber, and thank you, Mr. Rudolph. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Perhaps a 5-minute break? Don't see any objections. Are you ready?
It's a different term.
If I can call us back to order, the next is the Nanaimo BMX track redevelopment design, and again, it ain't Mr. Harding. Good morning.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you. So this report was in follow-up to the October 28th Committee of the Whole meeting, where we had a presentation by Keir Grattan from Nanaimo BMX. And the intent of this report was to provide some more information, background on a proposed redevelopment at the Marie Davidson BMX Park. And that the recommendation would be that Finance and Audit would recommend that Council consider funding of $35,000 during the 2020 to 2024 financial plan review for detailed design and cost estimates, and then also to direct staff to work with Nanaimo BMX and other stakeholders on the development of the detailed design and costing for the project.
Councillor Martin. And Councillor Turp.
Thank you. Being very familiar in my younger days with my son, who was an avid BMX and went on all these races, and one day I've got to contact them because I still have a box full of trophies that I need to give back if he'll lament them. I would actually, I know we could have further discussion, but I would actually like to move the motion as printed.
Absolutely. Seconded, Councillor Bonner. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the question to the staff is consider funding $35,000 during the 2020-2024 financial plan review. Is that a one-time or is it every year?
No, so the intent would be that $35,000 would be considered during our upcoming deliberations around the 2020 to 2024 capital plan discussion. Just a one-time, yeah, for the detailed design, yeah.
Councillor Bonner.
Just quickly, I'm quite in favor of these concepts of these proposals coming forward us where we're providing money to build the beginnings of the project in terms of design and costing. And it just frees us up so that when federal or provincial money becomes available as grants, we're off to the races already. So I'm quite in favor of this proposal.
Anyone else on this? And I just want to add to Councillor Martin's words. I think all of us have known young people who have enjoyed and recreated at this particular facility, and Marie Davidson was a saint in my view. I don't think I'm stating anything that isn't felt in this community by anyone who knew her and the work she did with so many young people. So I'm going to call for the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Guess we're not renaming this one.
The next is Emergency Medical Responder, Chief Fry.
Good morning, Your Worship and Council. I'm just going to introduce a report, and I'm going to introduce Assistant Chief Lemesurier, who's going to do a quick presentation for you today. Of note, the EMR program, you asked us at our presentation to come back with a staff report on it, so that's what we're doing here today with a recommendation for you. And Chief Lemesurier actually is an EMR license holder herself. So when we talk about the program or any questions you have about the license program, she is a license holder for her time on Protection Island and maintaining it today. And just a real quick example recently of something that we've had. We had a structure fire the other night where there also was a cardiac arrest taking place, and our staff performed CPR on the patient within the hot zone of the incident. So within the building itself there was smoke filled. So increasing the level to the community definitely can make a difference, an outcome in many cases. And I will put it through to her, and if you have any questions at the end, we can help you with that.
Thank you, Chief Fry, and thank you, Your Worship and Council. So a little background on pre-hospital care. So our ambulance service, BCEHS, they receive and respond to all calls for medical aid in the province. And using an assessment tool that they've created called the Clinical Response Model, they assess the information that comes in to determine which levels of paramedics they'll send to the call and whether or not they'll send fire first responders. So using that clinical response model, what we can tell is that they only send fire first responders to the most severe cases. And in the clinical response model, it indicates that they send fire first responders to urgent, serious, time critical, or immediately life-threatening calls. So if we were to go to EMR, this wouldn't change the type or the number of calls that we go to. We'd still be going to the same number of calls that we're dispatched to through that clinical response model. But what would change is the care that we can provide when we're there. And what the clinical response model also indicates is that fire first responders are meant to provide interventions until paramedics arrive. And what we know from the data we've collected of arrival times since January of 2016, we know that there are times when we are there without ambulance. What we also know based on that clinical response model is that we're going to the most severe calls, and so the ability to provide better care when we're there is really the big motivation to move to EMR. And this is not new for Nanaimo, and it's not new for Nanaimo Fire. As the chief mentioned, on Protection Island, we have paid-on-call members who've been providing EMR to that community through Station 7 for the past 10 years. And Nanaimo's not the first to do this. So other municipalities have already moved to EMR. Prince George, Campbell River, many municipalities in the Lower Mainland have already made that move, and it really does appear to be that there's a shift happening where municipalities are deciding for themselves the level of pre-hospital care that they want to provide to their communities. So a few benefits of EMR. It supports patients with protocols such as accurate administration of oxygen, which is very important in cardiac calls, the measurement of blood pressure and blood glucose, and one that really does seem to be appreciated by patients is pain management, to name a few. In addition to supporting patients, it also supports responders. So there's a growing body of research that suggests that the more knowledge, skills, and abilities that responders have, the more their confidence goes up and the more that their anxiety and stress on those scenes goes down. And that's the anxiety and stress that can also contribute to post-traumatic stress disorder. I can say, having been in EMR for the past 10 years, that when I moved from FR to EMR, it felt a little bit for me like moving from a bachelor's degree to a master's degree. My depth of knowledge just really increased. I just knew a lot more. That definitely increased my confidence and reduced my stress and anxiety on the scenes. We definitely hear about the stress and anxiety of our fire first responders on scenes. And Chief Fry has made it a big priority in our department to put mental health right up at the top. And so the ability for this to, first and foremost, support patients with patient care, and as a side effect, also support responders is a big win-win. So much like many of the other municipalities that I mentioned at the beginning, we are planning to do this over time. So it would be a transition, that process would be. And depending on the budget, we are planning to train a minimum of 10 firefighters a year. And we're also considering making this as a hiring requirement, EMR, in the future. So a big question that we are asked and that we've anticipated is, why is the city doing the province's work? Well, I can say this isn't new. We've been doing it for 25 years, and it's happening in communities around North America, actually. And what it comes down to is helping people on their really bad days. And what we know is that some of those days we're actually helping to save their life. And so this is a valuable program where we can provide better care when we're there, and it puts patient care at the top of our priority. So you have our recommendation in front of you, and we would invite any questions.
Councillor Gesselbrock and Councillor Turling.
I was going to move the recommendation, but you got a question.
I'll go ahead and then I'll ask.
All right, I would move the recommendation.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmings.
So,
Councillor Turling.
Yes, Your Worship, through you, the Assistant Chief. I actually have 3 questions, if I may. First of all, how long is the program, the training program?
Yes, so through your worship to Councillor Turley. The training program initially is a 6-day course, And then there's a day of training that comes right before the day they go to licensing. And so the program, it involves a certification which comes with taking the course, and then it involves going to the province and being licensed to be able to deliver EMR. So there's basically 8 days total in the whole program.
And question number 2, and I'll throw 3 in as well because they're budgetary concerns. Does a person with this classification get a higher pay level?
Through your worship to Councillor Tully. Chief, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, through the chair. So currently, all of our firefighters are paid as per our collective agreement, and there is no level of pay difference depending on the certifications that they have. It's based on years of service and their rank.
Okay, thank you. And the final one is, what about equipment and supplies? Is that obviously the outside of the amount of money we're asking for? So.
Actually, thank you through the chair to you, Councillor. It's actually included. We put it into the budget as part of that $60,000 a year, and we would account for it in our budget.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I'll certainly be supporting this recommendation. I think public safety should be Council's #1 priority, and it just makes total sense to me that the first responders on a scene to possibly save lives should be trained to a higher level to enable them to do their job even better than they do it now. Having said that, of course, I'm in support. I just wanted to ask about the time frame for getting all of the staff upgraded if this moves ahead. Is 5 years going to be enough, or do you see it taking longer than that?
Through the chair to Councillor Thorpe, thank you. Right now, it's scheduled over 6 years, and what we hope is that we will actually be able to manage the budget such that we could put more through annually, so it really could be a tighter timeline than that, but yes, we do anticipate that that will be enough.
Good.
What we've projected.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Hemmings.
Thank you. I had the pleasure of attending a presentation at UBCM regarding Delta's experience with this program, and they spoke very highly of it. I had a concern about possibly some territorialism with BCAS, but I understand that Delta, and also in local conversations, that genuinely, when you're looking after the patient, ensuring that patient is best cared for no matter who does it, is really the end goal of everyone involved. So I'm really happy to support this recommendation.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you. I'm quite in support of this as well. I think that our citizens would prefer to have the best medical response there first, as well as they can possibly get. Maybe one day we'll have doctors showing up, you know. My question is, in terms of the long-term budgetary, if you're planning on doing all of this in the 5 years, 6 years, after that, are we looking then at equipment replacement if we're not doing any more training, or is there going to be more upgrading of training, that sort of thing?
Thank you through the chair to Councillor Bonner. So the equipment is actually quite a nominal investment, and so we budgeted as part of that total to supply the department with that equipment. We would put some of the equipment into a replacement budget, which we've already anticipated moving forward. As far as training upkeep, it would replace our first responder maintenance training that we do, and so it wouldn't be additional training. It would basically take the place of the training that we already provide within the department. Chief Fry.
Chief Fry.
So currently, the first responder recertification is every 3 years, and this is a 5-year recertification. And part of that recertification is number of touches, so responding to calls. So the requirement through the EMA licensing board is actually less frequent, if that makes any sense.
And if I may, Chief Fry, there was some indication in the presentation that perhaps it would be a requirement in order to apply for the position in the first place. So potentially, over the long haul, might save the citizens some money on this particular aspect of it.
Correct.
I want to, or if there's no further councillors wish to speak, I want to recognize the presence of President Porter and several members of the executive here, the firefighters, in support of this. Any further discussion? Councillor Gesselbrock?
I just want to say, absolutely, you know, firefighters are already being called into these situations, and they should absolutely be legally and skill-wise prepared to deal with them. So I'm really happy to see this thing go through.
Well, given the shots about the aging members of council this morning, I certainly want to speak in favor of this particular motion to ensure that should the time the event happen, that I get the best care possible, myself and Councillor Thorpe included. All those in favor? Contrary? Carried. Thank you very much.
Don't do it at council meeting, we'll just get to the side.
That's not true.
The next is the Heritage Home Grant application, 911 Wentworth Street. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Worship. We're here today to seek Council's direction with respect to an application to the Heritage Home Grant Program. Mr. Schulberg, who is our Heritage Planner, is here this morning and can answer any specific questions. But I would note, just before I turn it back to you, that this property may be familiar to Council 911 Wentworth, as Council recently added it to your heritage inventory. I believe that was just last month or possibly a month.
Very good. Councillor Bonner?
Thank you, Worship. My question is mostly on process. This is a rather small amount. I'm curious as why this would come to council if not, if it wasn't just a policy and they are okay with it, then they just get the money and then we never see it. But these are always come to council. I'm just curious as why, or can we change that?
Mr. Schulberg.
Should I go?
Please.
Sure.
Yeah.
Through your worship, to Councillor Bonner. Well, it's an interesting question. We did have, years ago, we had a heritage commission that actually, and also I guess it was sort of a subcommittee that actually looked at applications for these sorts of things. And then there was actually, years ago, there was actually approval that happened, not even going to council. It was actually done through a subcommittee level. But a number of years ago, that changed that way of doing things, and now we have basically any sort of grant amounts come back to council directly for approval. So there was a history of a different way of dealing with these smaller amounts of grant monies being approved, but for many years now, we've been just taking it directly to council for approval.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Worship. Unlike Councillor Bonner, I think it should come to council because there's a limited amount in the reserve budget to cover these type of expenses, and I think it's our responsibility to determine what gets spent and what doesn't, rather than putting the onus on staff.
And I hesitate, Councillor Turley, to use your nickname that you indicated to me you received many years ago at university, and I won't this morning.
That's all right.
Would someone care to make the motion? So moved. Councillor Thorpe, seconded Councillor Bonner. Any further discussion or questions for Mr. Schulberg? All those in favor? Motion carries. Thanks very much. The next is the quarterly purchasing report, single and sole source, instances of non-compliance purchases and purchases in excess of $250,000. Ms. Mercer, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Your Worship. So again, the purpose of this report has become quarterly to provide the committee with information regarding sole source, single submission purchases and policy compliance. And this is all part of our current procurement policy. And this report deals with the quarter ending September 30th. So Appendix 1 outlines the sole and single source purchases. Appendix 2 outlines our purchases over 250, and Appendix 3 talks about non-compliance. And we did have one in quarter 3, and it related to the Departure Bay Road Slope Stabilization Project. We had 3 bids. They all came in over budget. And it was awarded to the lowest bidder to finish the project within the scheduled timeline.
Any questions for Ms. Mercer? Any particular concerns you have?
No.
We trust you.
Yeah.
Obviously. No need for a motion. All right. Thank you very much.
That's me again.
And the next is the procurement policy review. Again, Ms. Mercer.
So in January 2017, Council approved our current procurement policy. And as part of that policy, we are obligated to do a review of the policy every 3 years. So January 2020 marks our 3-year anniversary of having that policy, so we are undertaking a review. So in 2019, per Council's direction, the city has joined the Coastal Communities Social Procurement Initiative, and that initiative is designed to assist local governments to implement social procurement assessments, policies, strategies, and measurements. So our current policy has limited discussion on social procurement issues. So we're looking for council direction on whether you would like us to include social procurement as part of this review. The idea of would have a more robust inclusion of social, environmental, and ethical purchases within the content of the policy. So the reason we're asking is there's a budget implication. In a sense, a general review is about 10,000 plus taxes. A general review plus the social procurement part is 45,000 plus taxes. So we don't need any additional funding. We can fund that within our consulting budgets, but we wanted to know what council or the committee thought on that. And whatever option we choose, any changes to the policy will need to take into consideration legislation and trade agreements that pertain to municipal government. So we're just looking for direction.
Councillor Bonner.
I would like to recommendation number 1.
Councillor Gesselbrock, seconded. Anyone wish to speak to it before I get to Councillor Hemmons, whose hand was up quickly as well?
I was going to move the recommendation.
Councillor Turley wishes to speak to it.
Yes, Your Worship, to you to that. So just so will this consultant, for example, bring back information on whether the procurement items are going to cost more or cost less? Or I guess I'm a little confused as to why we would be spending money on a consultant to determine whether we should do it or not if we're not going to know whether it's going to end up costing saving a lot more money to buy pencils, for example.
So I will get Ms. Rushton to come up because she has more background knowledge on the social procurement side of things. But the consultant would take into consideration the items that council felt that were important. If it was important to council that we buy ethically sourced pencils or something like that, or ethically sourced products, he would take that into consideration in the review.
That's correct. So there's a number of things that the consultant can do that we can't do ourselves, and that's do a lot of interviews with council, with the members of staff, as well as the vendor community to deeply understand and do a fulsome review to make sure that our policy aligns with what we can actually physically do. We're hoping that we can also engage the consultant to give us a list, if you will, of companies who can assist the city in our social endeavors, in achieving some of the goals that we would set out in the policy. So have some of that alignment. So there would be quite a broad-reaching effect of doing the full review of the policy, as opposed to just reviewing the policy as it is. Adding the social procurement side of it adds a larger body of work for the consultant, and that's the difference.
Your Worship, if I could just add, so I guess maybe I'm confused, but the Coastal Community Social Procurement whatever the I stands for. Do they not have a lot of this information already as to, in other words, I'm wondering why we're trying to reinvent the wheel.
Thank you, through the chair, to Councillor Joy. We have one of the stage gates that the CCSPI has put in front of us is we have to do our own policy. Our policy meets our goals, so that's the juncture that we're at right now. We can leverage all the work that they're doing as well and best practice and things like that, but without knowing what's the best fit for the city of Nanaimo, we're unable to go forward. So that's the stage gate we're at right now. We'll continue to engage CCSPI and all the good work that they do, but we have to make a decision as an organization and figure out what we need. What's our best approach to this?
So basically, one size doesn't fit all.
Exactly. Thank you.
Councillor Hemmons, then Councillor Bonner, then Councillor Gusselbrook.
I'm going to pass, actually.
All right. Councillor Bonner.
Yeah, I'm very much in favor of this. From my basic understanding of the policy is it just allows us as a very large organization that buys a lot of products and services to be able to say, is this purchase through this company or this company the best fit for Nanaimo in general? And to give an example, one could purchase flowers from an international organization, or they can purchase flowers from a local company, and the local company hires local people and they give to the Symphony or whatever on a regular basis.
It's a certain cheekiness in it.
The concept here is how does it best fit Nanaimo overall, right? As opposed to just getting the cheapest bang for a buck. And sometimes the cheapest bang for your buck is not always the best thing for your thing. That's my thing, and that's why I'm going to.
Well, that was a very good answer, Councillor Gusselbrook.
Thank you, Worship. I'm absolutely in support of the first option, and I appreciate staff's initiative bringing this forward and the work that Councillor Hemmons is doing in conjunction with staff at the CCSPI. I think that as an organization, our purchasing power really does have an influence on the market, and if we as a community decide that we want a more equitable community and if we want a more environmentally sustainable community, we absolutely need to be putting our money where our mouth is. And I think if we look not only at social procurement as a way of increasing social equity, environmental sustainability, but also for economic development and strengthening our local economy, I think that's a lens that we have a lot of power with, and especially given that there's an island initiative on social procurement. If we can get our policies aligned with what Victoria is doing, what Comox, Cumberland are doing, we're going to be a much larger purchasing block, and because it's going to be more socially, environmentally sound, us as an island is going to be creating the community that we want to be living in. And for me specifically, I think that there's a lot of important work to be done with procurement around zero waste and the circular economy and figuring out what we're doing with packaging and items that are potentially more reusable, and also in construction when we're looking at city projects for demolition. Are we selecting a demolition company that will just be simply collapsing everything and shipping it to a landfill, or will they be separating it out into the different material streams for reuse back? So these are all things that I hope that we'll be looking into, and I really look forward to the report back. Thank you.
Anyone else? Councillor Thurber.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just need some clarification here because I heard Councillor Turley refer to a consultant, I believe.
It's in option number 1.
And I don't see that word.
Third bullet on the recommendations on page 77.
Oh, I see. Thank you. I was looking at the recommendations on page 75. So I'm in support of this as well, maybe for a slightly different reason than others, and I don't mind stating it, that I would appreciate having a more independent lens put on this whole topic. And I do support social procurement, but I also would point out that CCSPI probably comes from a slightly I don't want to use the word bias, but I can't think of another one, viewpoint. They are promoting social procurement, and that's fine, but we want to make sure we're doing what's best for Nanaimo. And so for that reason, I will support this.
Any further discussion?
Question.
Okay. Councillor Hammond.
Just very briefly, I don't have much to add other than I've taken part in 2 trainings through CCSPI with Ms. Rushton. They've been really informative. To Councillor Turley's point, there really is no standard formula for policies, and really I think if we were to do this, Nanaimo would probably be leading the island to really look at a specific city-based policy. I think engaging a consultant is a really good idea, and also understanding how business is actually happening in our community. Some of this stuff might already be happening, and we don't have a picture of that. So I'm in full support of the recommendation, and thanks staff for bringing it forward.
For what it's worth, I appreciate Councillor Turley's concerns and questions this morning, as I do of every member of council, obviously. And I'm not one who wishes to spend money easily when we have so many competing priorities and requests for something as timely as better intersections that might prevent horrible accidents or even deaths and injury. But having said that, as part of an economic vision for this community, we recognize that in our economic development plan, the best thing we can do is to retain existing businesses, let alone and secondarily attract other businesses. So part of the implications of this policy for me are about supporting our local economy, as Councillor Bonner pointed out, which is I can't describe it any other than cheeky and timely example, which I think is important to us to consider, and I think it's worthwhile spending the money to get the best advice possible so that we can, as Councillor Hemmons just suggested, be a leader in this. It is worthwhile, and I think the return on the investment to the community in terms of local business and the economic return and the confidence it reflects in local suppliers is worth supporting. Anyone wish to say anything further? If not, all those in favor? Contrary, motion carries. Thank you very much, both of you. Other business, and God forgive me if I mispronounce, Jennifer McCaskill, Nanaimo Police-Based Victim Services Society Co-Chair, and Cheryl Zapatichny, RCMP Victim Services Program.
Good morning, Your Worship. Council, thank you very much for having us. It's Jennifer McCaskill, the co-chair of the Nanaimo Police-Based Victim Services Society, here today with Cheryl Zapatichny, program manager. We are looking for some funding.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good morning, Mayor and Council. I would like to just give you a brief presentation on our program. Nanaimo RCMP provides services to victims of crime and other trauma, and some of those are practical assistance with different types of forms, police and court file updates. We accompany those to court with procurement support to making better witnesses, etc. We are guided by 2 pieces of legislation that provides rights for victims of crime, and those are the Provincial Victims of Crime Act and the Federal Canadian Victims Bill of Rights. Under the Victims of Crime Act, Provincial Act, they determine who justice system personnel who will provide these rights to victims. And as you can see, they talk about chief constables, chief officers, police members of all sorts, as defined in Section 1 of the Police Act and others working with the Attorney General. They don't define victim services in that definition. So we are acting on behalf of police to ensure that victims' rights are met. Rights under the Victims of Crime Act, justice system personnel must offer victims general information on those 5 points. We do that. Information that must be given under that same act are all of those items. If they are asking for it, it must be given. And we, again, act on behalf of police to ensure that those questions are answered. Something like the steps of the police investigation will tell them it's still under investigation. However, if they want more detailed information, we will refer them to the police member. So we act on behalf of the police. I have given you handouts on all of this information as well. So under the Federal Act, the Canadian Victims Bill of Rights, there's 4 general sections that victims are entitled to, and that's information, protection, participation, and restitution. And as you can see, there's more information regarding those points. We do provide support to
are we? We are one full-time program manager, myself. We have a full-time assistant program manager, one staff member who works 2 days a week, another who works 1 day a week, and we have 8 volunteers. They're averaging 45 hours per month. And one of those volunteers is a dog handler and her dog, which is great for everyone in the detachment, the victims, and people coming to the front counter and even wanting to talk to them. Our volunteers, they work hard, but their work, I have to tell you, is emotionally draining. I've been doing it for 28 years, and it's been tough at times. They provide services when they're available, but unfortunately, scheduling to have the consistency for the clients is difficult. We understand they have commitments, they can't always come when we need them, so we do the best we can with what we've got. There's only so much you can ask for volunteers, and let me tell you, we ask a lot of them. It's a difficult job, but they're there and we appreciate them.
So we are a non-profit society. We've currently got 3 main funding sources. That is the province, with just under $85,000. Cibc Run is currently funding us with just over $53,000, and that is not including in-kind for rent. Our services are provided out of the detachment, so we do have a space there. It provides great liaising between the victim services personnel and the members of the detachment. Keeps us also in the forefront of their minds to remind the victims that this service is here for their needs. And then we get a small amount from the regional district of Nanaimo. So the program currently is offered, or is run rather, for just under $148,000 per year.
And some statistics. In 2018, we served 837 clients, and as you can see, those files included murder, sudden death, motor vehicle incidents, fatal or serious injuries, threats, criminal harassment, etc. And child pornography, we're seeing an increase in child pornography. And as you can imagine, it's very difficult files to deal with the family members and the extended family members, friends, etc. They're tough. So most of our referrals come from the police, self-referrals, other community agencies, or victim services program. We may have a victim services program in Chilliwack that's referring here because the individual lives here, but the incident occurred in Chilliwack. So we'll take them on. The work. So most of the people that come into our realm are coming because they want to serve the community, or they have their own experiences, or they wish to support police, and other reasons, of course. As I mentioned earlier, the work is emotionally draining, and we do worry about consumption, fatigue, vicarious trauma. I know I've experienced that, and burnout are real concerns. So we really ensure a team that we can take care of each other. And we're exposed to some very traumatic events, similar to what the police are dealing with. So we may attend the scene, or we may be dealing with the clients at the office, something just happened, or we may be going when we're at the scene dealing with the clients there, or at the hospital, or wherever. I do want to just bring to your attention, you may have seen at a CBC interview with Staff Sergeant Jennifer Pound, who is a 22-year veteran of the RCMP on the Lower Mainland. The last 6 years of her career, she was in IHIT, the Integrated Homicide Investigation Team. She's currently off on medical leave for her PTSD. And she was saying, to quote her, the last 6 years on IHIT, she said it wasn't from, the PTSD wasn't from dealing with the relentless body count, 300 homicide victims, but in her estimation, it was from the emotional toll of trying to comfort families of victims behind the scenes. And we're doing that every day we're doing it. So as I said, we support one another and we really promote self-care. Unfortunately, the program does not have funding to provide psychological services to volunteers or part-time staff, and what we get as full-time staff is minimal. It's not enough. So, victim services or police. If we were not providing this service, then it would be up to the police. And our roles are very different from the police. We work hand in hand, however, our team is trained to provide support to victims with a trauma-informed approach. So we understand the effects of trauma and we support people coming from that perspective. The police don't have that training to do so. So if we were not able to provide that support and the police were to do that, both their work and victim services work, I can tell you that the police work that they're doing. That's all I have. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer.
So our current funding as from the city of Nanaimo is looking like this. In 2004, we were at just over $55,000. We've included the population growth. Obviously, Nanaimo is growing, and in 2004 it worked out to just under, 71 cents per person. So we carried on at that funding rate until 2007, where we had actually a funding decrease. That happened when we lost a rent subsidy. So we're still in the police detachment, but we've been operating on less money from the city. 2015, we came in a similar setting and we got $5,000 back for our rent, still not what we had lost originally in 2007. 2018, population of 113,000 individuals. We are at less than what we were operating at in 2004. So what we are here today to ask for, and it's a big ask considering the other people that we've been here about very good causes, as we're looking for 2 full-time positions, which equals about $100,000 including benefits. And recognizing that there's a lot of people coming to the table with hands open, we've also included some other requests, 1.5 full-time positions or 1 full-time position. The reality is that we're doing the best we can with a shoestring budget, and it really comes down to we will make use of any money that we get, but it's becoming extremely burdensome on the group of individuals who are part of the team and trying to pick up the pieces as the first responders move through the event, and then there's the victims who are left. Maybe it was a motor vehicle accident, you weren't expecting it. Maybe you were subject of a home invasion and you also weren't expecting it. Those all have implications to your life, and that then comes back to the support that the victim service team provides to anybody who's looking for assistance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I go to Councillors Thorpe and Gesselbrock, I just want to recognize the presence of Deputy Superintendent Fletcher.
Oh, thank you.
I believe that's the correct title. Who's here in a supportive role this morning, and thank you very much for your presentation. So, please, I recognize you in order already.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. I think I got my hand up first. Thank you very much, ladies, for the presentation. I think this is one of those services in our city that flies under the radar and that so many people are not aware of. And it does provide, in my opinion, such a valuable service. I happen to know a person who used to volunteer with you, and he told me how draining it was and how time-consuming it was to follow a victim through the entire post-crime court process. So I appreciate that. I just wanted to ask about training for volunteers. I assume there would be some formal training, and what are the costs associated with that?
Thank you. We do train our volunteers. It's over a period of 6 weeks. Myself and my colleague, we train in the detachment. We bring in speakers as well as police members that are experts in the field that maybe we might be dealing with. For instance, we'll bring in someone from the general investigation section that may be dealing with child pornography. So we're going to bring them in and speak to what we might expect and what our volunteers might expect in those types of files. So that takes place, like I said, for 6 weeks, usually 1 to 2 nights a week. It's long, it's involved, there's lots of policy because we're seen by the RCMP detachment locally as well as headquarters in Surrey. They run policy to us as well, and also the provincial government. So there's a lot of policy procedures, so the training takes quite a long time. We also have to provide a security clearance that takes probably 4 months to receive. So we try to manage that along with the training. So when the training is complete, the security clearance will come on as well. So when they begin, they can't come in and work unless they have a security clearance. So we try to juggle that so that it works hand in hand.
It does make it difficult from a volunteer standpoint, because if you think about the progression of volunteers, someone says, yes, I want to get involved, and then they show up and say, I want to get involved. Okay, great. Please fill out this enhanced security clearance. We're going to ask you a whole bunch of basic questions. Yeah, okay, I'm okay to do that. And then you get through, okay, now you're at the training, and maybe, as Cheryl said, 4 months, 6 months, a year has passed. Something's changed in your family situation, your lifestyle. You don't have time to commit anymore. And so that is why we're really looking to shift from a volunteer model to a paid position, really, to be able to have that consistency.
Thank you.
Thank you, Worship. Through you, thank you so much for the work that you do. Being able to support victims through these situations and stemming the flow of trauma is so critical, and it really decreases the impacts on the community for that further spread of trauma, and probably at the end of the day saves a lot of money as well. And I think that these positions are really important, and who funds them is it's an interesting question. And one question I have is what is the relationship and how do you work with Island Health and other mental health services and linked into the other health services that are available?
A big part of our job is to ensure that our clients' needs are met with regard to referrals. So if they're telling us what they need, or we're working together and we're determining what their needs are, we are going to make referrals to Island Health, mental health services, whatever that looks like for them, addiction services, etc. We are not counselors and we're not mental health workers, but should they come into our services, we certainly are going to guide them to the appropriate agencies, and we do have working relationships with those agencies.
So just to summarize it, like a first point of contact, you're walking through these individuals through the court proceedings and supporting them, and as you're recognizing certain needs come up, you link them to further mental health services or whatever else that they need to make it through these situations.
That's right.
Okay.
If that's their desire, we're not imposing ourselves on them. We'll determine through them what their needs are. If that's what they wish, we'll certainly support them.
Great. And in terms of the funding currently, there's just under $100,000, $84,000 that comes from the RCMP.
From the province.
From the province, okay. And is there liaison? Is there contact with them in terms of increasing their apportionment of funding and increasing funding for this very important service as well?
Yeah, we have had talks as a collective with regard to our association, and E-Division headquarters with the RCMP are always in discussions with the province. They have over the years given us slight increases and have given us program enhancement grant, one-time grant, with certain criteria that must be used for, but it wasn't an ongoing. This year, in addition to that amount, we received $146.
Okay, so a substantial increase, which is
$146.
No thousand at the end of it.
Oh, okay, I thought I heard 1,000. Okay. I guess my question is, with the population growth in Nanaimo, we showed that graph, and our apportionment per person has decreased from 0.6 or 7.1 down to 0.49 or whatever, I can't remember the numbers. Has the provincial portion of your past funding kept up with that apportionment as well, or no, that it's been decreasing per capita amount as well? That's unfortunate. Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to the delegation. Councillor Keselbrecht asked one question I was going to ask, so I'm down to two. So the population for 2018 of 113,000, you copied the city and Nanaimo website. That must include areas outside of the city boundaries, because I don't believe our population is reached 100,000 within the city yet.
104?
98.
98, I thought.
Is it fair to say that it includes areas served by the RCMP, such as Cedar and other areas that aren't included in the city? Is that the source of the number?
It could be the population, like we've noted, came straight off the City of Nanaimo's website. So where that number came from is maybe up for debate. Ultimately, that was I guess more of the in-your-face. Here's a reality of what we're talking about per person within the community. And whether that was 100,000 population, 98,000, or 115, we're still operating at less than we were 14 years ago. So.
Thank you. And my second question, I just wanted to clear up some confusion that I have with regard to the amount of money and service or rent that the city provides to your group. The first figure I saw was 53,000 or thereabouts, and that was, I believe, net on rent.
It was excluding rent.
Net of rent, yeah. So the extra 100,000 then would take it up to 153,000, and you're still not paying rent, or you are paying rent for the portion of the.
If we were to receive the 100,000,
yes,
it would go straight into those two positions.
So the city is still providing rent-free
in current space, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Evans. Pardon me, yes, Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. Through our delegation. A number of years ago, in the past life, I was using the services, the victim services, and I want to thank you for that. It was tough times, but it's much better now. My concern here is you're not getting enough money. And if you do some quick math, you'll find that if we took the $55,000, applied the inflation to it, and then the increase in the population in Nanaimo, you'd probably be at $93,000 right now. And had council in 2004 decided to put in these requirements of 2% each year and looking at the population, you wouldn't be here today, and everything would be fine. So if you look at 95,000, are you planning on going to the RDN as well after this and asking them for a bit more?
We have a lease plan in place. We do serve same boundaries, which does include some of the RDN. The $10,000 was the result of the correspondence request of the RDN. So there is an intent to go to them, but we do recognize the majority of the clients served are within the city limits.
Yeah. I would be much in favor of setting the amount at 95 or 100,000 and putting it in as a line item and giving it 2% each year. So I think that's fair. We should not be nickeling, diming, and starving the various people who help out our citizens.
Thank you, Councillor Bonner, Councillor Evans, and then Councillor Martin.
Thank you. A few things. So for staff, the process, we've been given a funding request. It's budget time, but it doesn't have an accompanying staff report, et cetera. I'm guessing it's not going to make it into our business plan, so if I could just have some clarification of next steps.
Ms. Curry?
Yeah, Your Worship, it would be coming to council. It'll be on the list of items. There's a growing list, as you know, for the 25th, and we will certainly present that opportunity for you to consider it during this budget cycle. That's a coincidence of the timing. So there's an opportunity to do that. We'll attempt to furnish this with additional information if we can get it around it to address some of your questions. But it will be on the 25th. So after the business plan presentations for those 2 days, then we reconvene that Monday. Then there'll be sort of the reconciliation day of all our budget items and any adding or subtracting that you may wish to do. And then if there's further discussions, we have budgeted some dates for you as well to continue the discussions into December if required. We anticipate it's December or November 25th. There will be a placeholder there with this information there and the tax implications for all of these.
Okay, thank you. Just a note, $100,000 for 2 full-timers with benefits. You guys aren't paying people enough. Frankly, because I've had the honor of working alongside victim services as a coroner, and I can share with this group, I mean, we can hear it in Councillor Bonner's voice. What you guys do is important. On a sudden death scene, everyone has a job. Coroner has a job, police have a job, fire have a job, and nobody's job is to support the family, except for victim services. So serving alongside you guys has been a tremendous honor, and I think you should be paying people more.
Ms. Curry, did you have something you wanted to add, or Mr.
No,
Rudolph?
Mr. Rudolph covered it, yeah.
Councillor Martman and then Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you. Through the chair for clarification. Councillor Bonner, you mentioned 92,000 would bring them up to date like inflation from 2004. But were you thinking of 92,000, but that's not even including the 100,000 asked?
No, if I may, I was saying that had we done all this work in 2004, they would be having the amount of money they need now. So, I'm quite in favor of the ask. I mean, they'd be at 95,000 now. You're looking for, what, another 50 on top of that? Or?
So you're looking for about 150. Right now there's 53 and you were looking for 100 if council decided that 2 more full-times could be added.
That's right.
Correct. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. Through you, question to staff. Would it be appropriate for a motion for, like, is this already will be coming to staff, or to have a motion for the city apportionment, like a report on that, and then additionally, with that information, can we also be able to send a letter to whatever appropriate provincial body to in support of increasing their allotment to keep up with what the population?
Certainly, council's at its prerogative to decide what it needs to do. If we're assuming that there's an appetite similar to some of these other conversations, but a motion would be helpful to direct it to come to budget for the 25th for consideration, and we'll fashion a report together with the information that we have at this stage. Wish other be referred to the province as well as the RDN. You can do that. So there's really no particular script other than it's here just in advance of us dealing with budget. Appears to be a significant budget ask, and if you're looking for your direction, you don't have to make a decision today. This is just a place to hear it. There would be an opportunity on the 25th to consider it further if you wish to do that.
I'm just curious on further comments from council. Thoughts?
Unless council feels it necessary, and I think it's clear that we don't need a motion, I'm quite happy to send a letter off to the Solicitor General, Mr. Farnworth. That's a freebie, so to speak, except for staff time, and obviously the request will come through the normal budgetary process. As Mr. Rudolph pointed out in our compassionate way this morning, we're all prepared to spend a lot of money, but we may need extra funding from some source.
Sooner than later.
The price of compassion is reduced to money. So, any further questions for the delegation? Councillor Gesselbrock?
Thank you. Although we may not need a motion, but is it worthwhile to have a motion on it that's staff prepare a report on the funding request from Victim Services, and a letter to Minister Farnworth be drafted in support of further funding for the province, and a letter to the RDN.
Thanks. I had no doubt that Councillor Bonner would be second to the motion. And I take it that was a motion. That we received a report back as part of the budgetary process.
On the 25th, yeah.
Any discussion on this? All those in favor? And that includes a letter to the Solicitor General. Very good.
And RDN.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. Carried. Thank you very much, both of you. Appreciate your time this morning. And Deputy Fletcher. The next is correspondence from the Nanaimo Area Land Trust. This was sent to all of us, and I asked to have it on the agenda so that it can be considered for what it's worth. I'm not asking for a motion in the circumstances, but as the Nanaimo Area Land Trust points out, as did the Symphony Society this morning, we haven't provided an increase in any monies for them over the many years, and the RDN was Services raised it to 35, and the city's contribution, of course, we're half of that anyway, has remained at 30, so I'm just going to suggest politely that it will come back to us as part of the budgetary consideration as well. I don't, I'm looking for a motion this morning. Any comments on this that might assist staff? Councillor Bonner?
Only it's, again, I'm going back to the same head. We given them the 2% when we first started this, they'd be at 40,000 right now, and they wouldn't be coming asking for more. So I would like to see some of these things that we give on a regular basis as light items that have a 2% increase with them, so that they can do the good work that we ask them to each and every day.
Councillor Thorpe?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just following up on that, I don't disagree with Councillor Bonner, but it seems to me that this is maybe a separate discussion that we need to have at some point about when does something become a line item in our budget, because we could add items or organizations all day that are very worthwhile organizations that we give support to from time to time. At what point do they become a line item? And what is that based on? How do we make that decision? So I would just like to have that discussion at some point. Thank you.
Wisely said. Councillor?
Just briefly in response to that, I think if something has been on the books for like 25 years, it might be considered a line item.
Yeah, let's make a policy.
Councillor Gesselbach?
Just thank you, Worship. I just wanted to second what Councillor Starwood said. I think that's an important conversation to have and something to look into.
Very good. Given it is the chamber luncheon today, unless anyone's anxious to say something further in terms of timing, period. Thank you very much. Deputy Fletcher, Victim Services.
We have a question. Through the chair. No, I was just going to provide some information.
Well, it's supposed to be a question, so.
I know, I apologize. I thought it was going to be drawn upon during the presentation by Victim Services. The issue of the in-kind came up as to what is afforded at the detachment. The Victim Services is a very greedy group. They have 2 offices they use, and they run the entire program out of 2 offices and a cubby. So they're a very efficient, dedicated group of individuals. And I've known Cheryl since I was actually a teenager, and she drives this program with her heart and her soul. And I can't be prouder of the work they do. So that's my question.
Thank you. Let the record show that the Deputy Superintendent asked a question about how many offices were available.
That's right.
Not wishing to encourage anyone to abuse questions in the future. Thank you very much. That takes care of questions. Motion for adjournment. Move Councillor Bonner, second Councillor Markman. All those in favor. Thank you very much, everyone.